thank you one more time. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Those who are watching us live online, as we are going into the parasha of this morning, I welcome you one more time. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. And the parasha of this morning is known as Behalotecha. The parasha of this morning is called Parasha Behalotecha, and I subtitled it Mammon and Negative, or Mammon the Negative Complaint. To murmur, to begin to complain negatively, to begin to complain and to ask for what actually you have, but because of our unsatisfactory desire for the flesh, we begin to request and asking God for what it is unnecessary. We tend to feed the flesh over the spirit. So the subtitle of this morning is known as Murmur the Negative Complaint. Intro. Beginning this Shabbat and continue almost until Tisha B'Av, we read in the weekly parashah of every trial that Bnei Israel faced in the desert, often unsuccessfully. Indeed, such sad stories seem to dominate the book of Bamidbar. Parasha Behalotecha details many subjects that occur both before and after the children of Israel leave from Mount Sinai toward the Promised Land. What I'm saying is that from this Shabbat to until Tisha B'Av, which is the ceremony that we normally do as the children of Israel to commemorate the destruction of the first and the second temple. The first temple by the Babylonian and the second temple by the Roman Empire. So this Tisha B'Av is a ceremony that we celebrate, and on that day we normally do fasting because it's like it's like a dark day, in the history of our people. So therefore, Tisha B'Av is the solemn fasting to commemorate, to remember the two temples that were destroyed. From now until then, we are going to be reading a lot of trials that before the people of Israel unnecessarily, just because of complain. These are people that they saw God face to face. They heard from God face to face. God uplifted them up unto himself face to face, and still yet they complain. The Lord God delivered them from Israel. They saw the miracles. It is not like what we are having right now. These men and these women were very intimate with the Almighty, and the Almighty were very, very intimate with them. But at the end of the day, what do they get? They just continue to complain, and for no reason. Even some of them even doesn't want to even reach the Promised Land. They were so used to the sense that God will feed me at all time. This slavery mentality that the master has to provide for the slave, and we have to understand that these people were of a very low self-esteem. We need to understand that. It is very, very important to drag that word home. These men and these women that left Mizraim, these people are people of low esteem because of what has happened to them in their life in Mizraim, because of the lordship of the Egyptians over them. So they think that everything has to be provided for them. And we have a lot of nations under the sun at this present time that think that they deserve everything in the world because of the slavery mentality. Because of the mentality of the slave master has to provide for the slaves. The parasha, this particular parasha, which is Behalotecha, is divided into three halves. The first half is the beginning, which is known as the beginning half, and it talks about the ascent, that is the upliftment of the people. And the second one is called the middle half, which is known as the book of the inverted nun. And what is this book of the inverted nuns? Nun, as we know, is a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Nun is a letter in the Hebrew alphabet, but what we call it inverted nun is because this nun take a shape of a mirror reflection. It's like it's upside down. So, and it's a kind of a very rare glyph used in the classical Hebrew text. Its foundation in the text is disputed by most scholars, and some of our rabbis are also even having different opinion about why the nun is inverted. I mean, it is turned upside down. Why is it so? But there are a lot of explanation and a lot of ideas about the meaning of these inverted nuns. So, like for example, we have that the two nuns picture the two cherubim that is, that are standing face to face or leaning and bowing their head upon the ark, and the nun is also a short for what is called Napilah, which means the downfall, which will be reversed when the people of Israel return to the ark, or rather when the people of Israel return back to the Torah. It also represents the concealed Torah. That is another idea, that it also represents the concealed Torah that will be revealed at the end of day. And the last one, and not the least, is the end half, which is known as the descent. That is when all the problem started. The ascent. Before leaving Mount Sinai, the parasha begins with the method of the lighting of the menorah, of the golden menorah, by Aaron, the high priest, the purification and inauguration of the Levites in their service in the sanctuary, the first Pesach in the wilderness, the law of the Pesach Shenim, the decision when to travel and the order of travel of the camp of Israel, and the making of the two silver trumpets of Moses. The first journey of the Israelites is in detail, as is the taking leave of Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe, from the children of Israel at the Mount Sinai. All this is known as the ascent. That is when everything was robust, everything was fine, they were doing fine, they were obeying, and they were doing everything according to the commandment which God has commanded Moshe, our teacher. Now, the middle half, as I said, is called the inverted nun, which is the section. It's about 85 letters in the parasha, known as the section of the inverted nuns, which needs much explanation, as I just explained before. This section acts as a divide between the ascent and descent of the fortune of the children of Israel in the wilderness. And the last and not the least is the descent, where the problem starts. After leaving Mount Sinai, the beginning of the trouble in the wilderness, the Torah tells of the complaint of the children of Israel to Moses to provide them with meat. The prophecy of Eldad and Mildad in the camp, and the insulting of Moses' wife Zipporah by his sister Miriam and Aaron and her subsequent punishment by God. The word Behalotecha means when you cause to rise, or causing to rise up. Its immediate association is to Aaron, the high priest, ascending the step of the golden menorah and coming to kindle or to rise his flame in the sanctuary, as detailed in the first half of the parasha. In my opinion, the word also relates to the ascent of the children of Israel to the light of the promised land, as in this parasha, they were to begin their eagerly anticipated ascent there with Adonai within their midst. And that is a kind of my own understanding too, but we need to understand that other kinds of understanding about the meaning of these two and there's another understanding, another school of understanding which connotes the rise of the people, or the rise of the people against Moshe. Or the rise of the people against God Himself when they begin to complain and complain and complain. We need this, we need that, we need everything, so just only to consume for the flesh, not thinking about their spiritual life. And also the rise of Miriam against against her brother Moshe. So we can see that people always say that the enemy is within, that the enemy is in the house. Here, I'm not trying to tell us that Miriam is that she's an enemy of Moshe. No, please, I want you to get me very, very clear, so that you won't go and say, one Rabbi Isaac said that Miriam is that she's an enemy of Moshe. No. There are a lot of midrash about this. That's saying that I'm not saying that she is an enemy, but the point here that the Torah is trying to tell us is that Miriam was a kind of a woman, that she was concerned. That is from the midrash. She was concerned about the future of Israel. I don't know what is in her mind. I don't know why she began to backbite at the back against her brother, or lashon hara against her brother Moshe. But the point here is that if we want to look at it from the point of view of Miriam, we can see that she wants to protect the nation. She wants to protect the leadership, the pureness, the sanctification of the leadership of the people. Yes, Zipporah have been a black woman. Zipporah might be a Cushite, but the point here is that God is trying to tell us that with Him there is no respect of color. That He's telling us here directly that He is God that created all things, all beings, here on this planet or in any other planet that is going to exist or that will ever exist. That He is the God of all creation. It doesn't matter, what color of skin that you have, but the most important thing that God is telling us that we are all His creation, that we are all His people, that we are all, created by Him and we are made in His image. So that is the most important thing I want us to take from here. Yes, Miriam murmured and backbite and did lashon hara against her brother Moshe, and therefore she faced the consequence of her action by God striking her with Sarah. Why did God strike her with Sarah, which is leprosy? Some of our sages tell us that when God called them into the temple, into the to discuss with them, into the Mishkan to discuss with them, the sages state that Miriam was actually arguing, and God is saying, listen. Aaron kept his mouth shut. He was listening. That is Aaron. Aaron understands when to talk and when not to talk. But in this case, the woman was trying to defend herself, and God is telling her, listen to me. What does that mean according to our own tradition? That means that she doesn't want to. She is eager to only talk, to only speak about her own point of view, not listening to the point of view of the Almighty. Trying to argue with the Almighty when the Almighty is presently speaking. That means that our mind is not even there. Our mind is only in what she wants to say. So therefore, she received the punishment. The final stage of the Exodus was about to be realized. The pinnacle of the ascent was finally in the sight. The silver trumpet were to be blasted, but then things turned sour, and the descent, as we shall see in the remainder of the book of Bamidbar, starting at the end of this parasha. Please, I want to make a little bit of announcement. I want you to bear with me because this parasha is a little bit long, and I want to explain in details for us to understand, this parasha in detail. It's very, very important, because if we rush over it, we have no gain. And the most important is for us to be able to imply this study in our life, in our present life, because the Torah is alive every day, it's alive every second, it's alive every time. So if we read and we don't imply it in our life, then we are wasting our time. Then there is no gain for you or for me to read the Torah and without us not putting it into practice. So that is why I want us to please listen, bear with me, and let us do exactly what the Holy One, blessed be He, is teaching us in this parasha. The rapid, devastating, and lethal, the great high described at the beginning of this parasha is the turning point of the great low, which is to be related in the remainder of the book of Bar Mitzvah. The Torah purpose is to teach us how to live. Note, Rabbi Cohen, in view of the above, what life lesson can we learn from Bar Mitzvah? So, what life lesson can we learn from the book of Bar Mitzvah? It's very important. And note, Rabbi Cohen, he said the purpose of the Torah is to teach us how to live. Torah is a guidance. The word Torah means guidance, to guide, to lead us in the path of justice, the path of righteousness, the path of holiness, the path of relationship to the Almighty or with the Almighty. So this is the purpose of the Torah, for us to be able to learn from the mistake of our fathers, from the mistake of our mothers, from the mistake of the past generation, so that we will not repeat the same mistake. And that is what we just read in the Messianic writing in the book of First Corinthians, chapter 10, from verse 6 to 13, telling us that the purpose of the Torah is to teach us to teach us the mistake of the past, so that we will not repeat the mistake of our fathers. Because in the past we can read from the Torah what befell our forefathers, what befell our foremothers, the problem that they face, their unsatisfactory way of life, and their state of mind. So therefore the Torah is teaching us that we as their descendants, we that carry their DNA, should not fall into the same trap, that we should continue to do that which is just and right according to what the Holy One, blessed be He, is teaching us. Sefer Bamidbar, which means the book of Bamidbar, explained, Rabbi Cohen teaches us about dealing with life challenges. In Bamidbar, Bnei Israel are traveling, never at rest. Bar Mitzvah is not filled with lofty spiritual experiences, as in Shemot, which describe the Exodus, the giving of the Torah, and the Mishkan. Bar Mitzvah is not filled with loss, as is Vayikra. Rather, Bar Mitzvah is filled with real life challenges, tasks, foreign enemies, and jealousy. Everyday challenges are what Bar Mitzvah teaches us how to address. This is what the book of Bar Mitzvah teaches us to address. This is what it's telling us now, because we need to understand that in the book of Bar Mitzvah, our people were in constant movement. They were in constant camping and packing up and resting, and packing up and resting. So these challenges that life that comes along with life, that comes along with life, this is what the book is teaching us to address. Because many people think that they have arrived. Many people think, oh yeah, I have arrived, I'm okay, I'm strong, I can rest. But I am telling you, no, you haven't arrived. You haven't arrived at all. It is complete no. As far as you have life, as far as you are breathing, as far as you are still on this planet, you haven't arrived. There is no peace. The peace, your resting is in the world to come. We can only arrive in the world to come, because as far as you live on this planet, there is a daily struggle. There is a daily activities that you have to do. So therefore, don't ever think that, I have arrived. No, you haven't arrived, and that is where the problem is. When people think that they have arrived, and there is a situation that happens to them in the way that they never thought about, or in the way that they haven't planned, then therefore they become depressed. They now go into depression and they begin to, argue and complain and accuse God. That God, why did you allow this to happen? Why did you allow that to happen? I thought everything is perfect and okay. No. So the book of Bamidbar is teaching us how to address all these different situations that might arise during our lives on this planet. How? The key, right, Rabbi Cohen, is to remember that we are on a journey. As Bnei Israel were in the desert, much of man's discontent comes from his mistaken belief that he has arrived. If so, he wonders, why is his life not as perfect as he has imagined it will be? If we remember that life is a journey, that we have not in fact arrived, and never will in this world, we will not experience disillusionment. Instead, we will be grateful for what we have, even as we continue to work for what is missing. On a personal level, conclude Rabbi Cohen, one who understands that life is a journey full of challenges will avoid the frustration and anger that damage relationships. On a national level, those who are frustrated by the failure of the state of Israel to live up to their greatness hope will learn to be grateful for what we have, even while recognizing that we still await Mashiach. I want us to understand this clearly, as I just read, that the hope of our people, the hope of my people, is the return of the Mashiach. We are all messianic. We believe in the return of the Mashiach. We believe that the Mashiach will come, and when the Mashiach comes, that is when we can have hope. That's when we can have rest. So as far as the Mashiach has not come, there is no rest. We have the hope that is coming. We have the hope that is going to soon return. But as far as he has not yet returned, we don't have that rest yet until when he returns. And so therefore, as Rabbi Cohen said, that many people have this disillusionment that everything is hunky-dory, everything is fantastic and good, and when one thing or the other happens that they have never planned, then therefore it becomes a problem. They begin to accuse their wife, they begin to accuse their husband, they begin to accuse their children, or accuse their national leader, they accuse their country, accuse their government that why did this and this and this is happening. But I want us to understand and remember that we haven't yet arrived. We are going to arrive in the world to come. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe regarding the Cushite woman he had married. Bamidbar chapter 12 verse 1. At the end of this parasha, or at the end of this week parasha, Miriam and Aaron consult about their brother marital relationship. Apparently, Zipporah, their sister-in-law, had let slip a complaint about being married to a prophet of God, and had thought that maybe they should try to bring Moses back down to earth a little for the sake of his family. In the end, it turned out that they had been in the wrong, and God told them so. Miriam ended up with Sarah, and according to the Talmud, Aaron as well. Apparently, they had spoken Lashon Hara about Moshe, and even though it has been for all the right reason, God still took them to tax for it. So I'm trying to tell us here from what the Talmud said, right? Saying that even Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, was also affected, but in the Torah, it wasn't written that way, okay? Because in the Torah, the Torah speaks specifically that it was only Miriam that was affected. But we need to understand here also, because we have different midrashim about this. I said too that in the sense that when God called them into the Mishkan to discuss with them, right? As I just said before, that Miriam, she was there, she was the only one that was arguing, not listening to the explanation of God. And I want us to also understand a particular issue here, that to whom much is given, much is expected. To whom much is given, much is expected. These are men, and this is a woman that have a very close encounter and close relationship with the Almighty. And we can see here from their statement, say, who does he think he is? He thinks that he is the only one that God is talking with. He is the only one that is a prophet of God. If we look at from that negative connection, from that negative way of speech, they didn't mention Moshe by name. They didn't say Moshe. They say he. They think now here he is telling us here now that they have already excluded him from the family. It's as if they've already detached Moshe from the family. Say he, like he's a stranger, as if he's not part of them, as if he is not part of the family. And so therefore they face the consequence of their action. They face the consequence of their action. You cannot speak to the servant of God that way, because God said Moshe is a man that performed 100% everything I told him. This is a man that whatsoever I tell him, he is going to do it 100% without moving to the right or to the left. He does exactly what is commanded. Remember that Moshe was a general in the Egyptian army. Moshe was a soldier, so he understands the meaning of command. You understand? Because Miriam and Aaron were not a soldier. So they are civilians. So they don't understand the meaning of commands or the chain of commands. Moshe was not like that. He was fully trained soldier. So you understand the chain of command. And when God command him, he obeyed to the least, without turning to the right or to the left. And that is the witness that God himself witnessed about him, that he is a man that never do anything wrong in my home, in my house. He does everything perfectly well. Who are you to start speaking gay or speaking negative against my servant Moshe? God said, against my servant Moshe, since they have already excluded him from the family. God drew him close unto himself. God embraced him and covered him under his own wings. And so therefore, because they talk negative against the servant of the Most High, and God strike them with Sarah. According to what Sedi said, that Sarah is a result of you speaking Lashon Hara. And what is Sarah? Sarah is what is confinement. Like someone being in quarantine, because you want to separate family, because you want to divide a family, you want to divide husband and wife. So therefore, you are going to be quarantined. You are going to be divided. You are going to be removed out of the society. You are going to be sent into a separation. So that is the consequence of their own action. The Talmud, when discussing this seemingly very important mitzvah, also provide example of the extent to which it goes. In Shabbos 127b, the fourth example is of a wealthy man who could not pay his worker what he owed him. The worker asked for his money, and when his employer said that he had none, the worker then asked for another thing of value, just to get paid before returning home to his family. He did not wish to come home to his family empty-handed. I'm giving us an example from the Talmud concerning this important mitzvah, the mitzvah of judging everyone into the positive end, or into the right side. Judging everyone on the right side, even though if you don't know them, you judge everyone into the right side. Now, what the Talmud is saying, but if you know them, that they are negative or they are evil people, you see how to judge them into the right side, but keep your eyes open and watch them very well, because you know what they can do. You know that these people are men or women filled with evil. That if you know perfectly well. But if you don't know somebody, if you don't know a stranger, the Talmud is telling us in the Mikvah that we have to always judge everybody into the right side, into the good side. You know, taking a benefit of a doubt. Always judge people on the right side. So, I'm giving us an example from the Talmud of what this particular mitzvah is telling us, of what Aaron and his sister did to their junior brother Moshe. So, as the story goes, or as the example goes, this servant or this employee begins to ask from the employer a lot of things that he should be paid, you know, before he return home to his family, because he doesn't want to return home to his family empty-handed. So no such luck. To each request, the employer said no. Each time saying he was unable to comply, but never giving a reason why. When the worker figured he had run out of option, he threw his sack over his shoulder and headed home disheartened. But never once did he ask his employer for an explanation or accuse him of lying and trying to shortchange him. He just accepted the answer and his fate and went on his non-merry home, or on his non-merry way. Shortly after the holiday, the employer loaded up his donkeys with food, drink, and money, then headed off to his employee's home. After feasting with him and paying him his due, he asked his worker, "When I told you I had no money, possessions, produce, etc., what did you suspect?" For each thing, the employee gave a reason that absolved his employers of any wrongdoing. Each time, though he could have easily suspected the employer of no good, the worker instead assumed that some unforeseen circumstances had come up that had prevented the employer from making good on his debt. As heartbroken as he had been to have worked so hard and not bring anything home to his family to show for it, he never allowed himself to turn against his employer. He always judged his boss to the side of merit. That is what I'm trying to say, that God always wants us to judge our elders, our parents, our father, our mother, our brothers, our employees, our leadership, the government, our prime minister, our premier, to always judge them into the side of merit, into the right side. No matter what come, we always try to judge people onto the side of merit. Then came the punchline. Everything you assume in my merit was exactly what had happened. As you have judged me to the side of merit, may God always judge you to the side of merit. Replied the employer. Let's examine this story under a macroscopic lens. I want to examine this story perfectly well. The story is good, it's perfect, but let us examine every word here, because without examination we will not understand it. It sounds sweet and it sounds well, but let us bring it under the macroscopic lens of understanding to learn more. The story gets at least 2 wows. The 4th wow is for the employee who had the heart to join the employer to the side of merit to such an extreme, which is extremely hard in the present day. In this 21st century, in this type of economy that we are now, I don't think that it will be extremely hard. That is what I want to say, that an employee will try to judge their employer to the side of merit. They'll say, oh, because we have an agreement. This is our agreement. Our agreement is my work is $25 an hour, or my work is $30 an hour, or my work is $50 an hour, and so on and so forth. So therefore, at the end of the week, I need my cash. If you don't pay me my cash, then there's a problem. Then the employer can be sued. You cannot come and say, okay, I'm sorry I don't have the money, or I'm sorry my market didn't sell, or I'm sorry I haven't received my money from my customer. That doesn't happen, right? There is an employee bill of rights and the employer bill of rights. Everybody have their rights. So as a worker, you have the right for your what? For your wages. So at the end of the week, or at the end of the day, or at the end of the month, or at the end of bi-weekly, it depends on the agreement that you have with your employee, with your employer. Then at the end of those time, you get paid. You cannot, your employer cannot come and say, I don't have your money now. That won't happen. Not in this country though. I mean, maybe in some third world country that might happen, but not in well-advanced country like Canada. So that is one of the examples. This is very extremely hard that an employee will judge their employer into the side of merit just like that. I think that most people will have started. I think that most people will have started with the accusation and arguing much earlier, especially while making their humble request on such a wealthy employer. I know my Yesara has a difficult time believing in the honesty of others, especially in situations similar to this one. What I'm trying to say is that I know that our negative inclination will say, oh, that employer is lying. This cannot be. I have worked all week, I have worked all day, I have worked all month, and this guy is coming to tell me some story that doesn't make sense. That won't happen. I need my money, and that is it, because I have to go home to my family to feed my children. I have children too, I have wife, I have bills to pay, as it is said here. Bill and bill and bill. So because my bank will not come and say, okay, because your employer did not pay you, then don't pay your mortgage. No, that won't happen. You know. So people at the present time will find it very hard to accept such a story. The second wow is for how every weird situation the employee had imagined had actually been the weird truth. To be right about one or two of them will have been something, but to be right about all of them, it seemed a little much. Yet the Talmud report that is the way it was. So, I mean, for the employee to be right about one thing or the other about the employer is something. I mean, it can be acceptable. But for the employee to be right about everything that that the employer has ever said, is something fishy though, you know. The truth is that in everyday life, we all seen how a negative assumption about people or situation can end up being wrong. As logical as they seems at the time, a lot of the time there is a good reason for what doesn't work out the way we plan. The egg ends up on our face, not on the face of the assumed guilty party. The point of the Talmud, therefore, should be well taken. This is the example that the Talmud is telling us, that the way we have planned might not work out, but we shouldn't take that negatively. That is what the Talmud is saying. If a situation that you've not foreseen arises in your life, you shouldn't take it negatively. You shouldn't say that is the end of the world. You shouldn't say, oh, I'm going to go and commit a suicide because it didn't happen the way I have planned it. You didn't say, there is no God, because if there is God, this thing wouldn't have happened. You don't go and start accusing God. You don't go out to start accusing your wife or your husband. Say, oh, it's because my husband do this and that, or it's because of the fault of my wife because she did this and this and this, or it's because of the fault of my children. No, That is what God is saying. That's what Talmud is telling us here, giving us this example that we shouldn't take it negatively. Because if we look at it from a right perspective, we will see that in every negativity there is always a positivity. That's what I always tell my people. If you take things solely negative, everything negative will be happening in your life because you are so negative in every situation in life. Whatsoever you seek will be attracted or will be attached to you. If you are a positive person, positivity will be attaching themselves like a magnet onto you because you see things from the perspective of positivity. So, in any situation that happens in your life, let us always look at it from the point of positive. It might be a negative experience, but don't dwell in that negativity. That's what the message of this man is trying to tell us. Let us try to dwell in the positivity. The children of Israel being fed every time. Oh God, complain and complain. They murmur against God. Not thinking that they are murmuring against Moshe. Moshe is not the person that took you out of Egypt. Moshe is not the person that brought you out of Mizraim. Moshe was just an instrument. It was God himself that brought us out of Mizraim. It was God himself that brought us out of Egypt. It was God that divided the sea of reed into parts so that we will pass. It was God that subdued our enemy under our feet. It was God that destroyed the Egyptians that we will see them no more. It wasn't Moshe. Moshe was just a human being, an instrument of God. But most of the time, they think that they are accusing Moshe, but not knowing that they are accusing God himself directly. Because Moshe is being used by God. That is it. So when you accuse, or when you think negativity, or when you talk Gael or Lashara against the servant of God, you are not talking against that person, but you are talking directly against God, who is using that person to do his work. So therefore, my people, I want us to get this understanding. It is very, very important that we should understand on how we speak to the men and the women of God, even to your own wife, even to your own husband, and to your own children, to your own government, because it is God who has appointed that power. It is God that is in control. It is God that put that person there. Yes, but it's kind of manipulation. You know, they stole the election, this and this, and so if God doesn't want that person to be there, I believe you me, that man will not last a nanosecond. If God does not want that man to be there, I repeat again, that man will not last a nanosecond. But if God has allowed him to be there, God has permitted such a person to be there, let's respect him or her. Let's give them the benefit of a doubt. And when God says, okay, it's not, I don't like the way it's doing, he knows the way to remove such a person out of power. And the same thing with your husband and your wife. Respect your wife. God has given you that a woman as the bone of your bone and the flesh of your flesh. That woman, she's you. And that husband, that your husband is you. You are both one. So therefore, you do not rise up and talk negativity against one another, but try to resolve every issue in a calmly and in a positive way. Always trying to see every situation in life from the point of positivity. Because when we look at it from the prism of God, from the prism of positivity, then we can arrive as a mutual understanding agreement of a positive agreement, and there won't be that enemy to fight or to quarrel. That will have been eliminated because we are seeing things from the perspective or from the prism of the Almighty. So just like the people, as they rise up and they begin to do or whatever they want to do, complaining, and we need meat, we need food, we need bread, we need water, trying to provoke the servant of God. And we saw why they fell. Because they want to provoke Moshe, thinking that they are provoking Moshe, not knowing that they are provoking God himself. And we had in this week a parasha for what Moshe said. Moshe said, why should God put this burden on me? I was, God, I was in Midian doing my job perfectly well. I'm a shepherd. I have my wife, I have my 2 sons. We're doing fantastic. We're doing fine. Until when you called me to come and take these people out of Mizraim. Why putting all this burden, all this load on me? I'm not the one responsible for all this. You are the one responsible. So Moshe brought everything to the foot of the Almighty. All their complaint. And God said, don't worry. They want to eat meat, I will give them meat. They will eat and eat and eat until that meat will start coming out of their nose. Because they complain negatively. It's not that they don't have meat. No, they have their cow, they have their chicken, they have their lamb, they have their ram, they have their goat. They have thousands and millions of them. Why can't you take and kill and eat? But no, they just want to consume everything onto their own physical flesh. So, see, these are negative complaints. That is what I'm saying. They murmur and murmur against the servant of God, thinking to provoke him into anger. So therefore, my people, let's understand that we are not provoking that man, but you are directly provoking God, who is using him to perform his work. Closing. Surely Moshe Rabbeinu fit that bill. He fit all this description that we just described. As God tell Moshe, when meaning sublime, you are talking about the great Moshe Rabbeinu, the humblest man on the face of the earth, completely trusted in my house, and the greatest prophet that will ever live. There was nothing to suspect him of at all. That is what God is telling Miriam and Aaron. There is nothing to suspect my servant Moshe. He is the humblest man that ever lived. He is the humblest man, the man that take orders and obey orders to the least. So why are you accusing him? Why are you talking lashon hara against him? Why are you talking blah 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 against the man of God? What is wrong with you people? Why don't you understand? Is God not speaking with each and every one of us? What does he think he is? He's the youngest in the family. What does he think he is? We are all prophets. We all know God. But we have to understand there is a different level of prophecy. God speaks with you in dreams. God speaks with you in vision. God speaks with you in trance. But with Moshe, it's not like that. With Moshe, God speaks with him mouth to mouth, face to face. There is different level of prophecy. You might be a servant of God. You might be whatever you want. You might be the greatest prophet in the world, but not on the level of my servant Moshe. That's what God said. He's a man well respected in my house. He does everything as I command him. So who are you to rise up against him, to talk lashon hara against my servant? They face the consequence of their actions. It is ironic that God inflicted them with Sarah, as Rashi states. He points out back in the parasha Tazria. Sarah means having to go into quarantine. This is because people, through their lashon hara, ends up distancing people from one another, like a husband and a wife, for example. In this case, Miriam and Aaron are spoken as they had to in order to devise a way to bring husband and wife closer. There is another lesson for the person who does not judge a good person on the side of merit. Your suspicion about them, even with the best of intention, will only backfire, accomplishing the opposite of what might have been intended for good. Alright? So this is what Rashi points out why God struck them with leprosy. Because leprosy means that person, the leprous person, is being quarantined. He's been set out of the community. He's been sent out of the people. He's been given another kind of inhabitant outside of the camp. That person is being separated from the people, because his intention is to separate people from people, and God does not like that. So as it is said, among my people, measure for measure. Your measure or your plan is to separate husband and wife, or your plan is to separate friends from friends. Your plan is to divide and rule. So therefore, you face the same measure. That is it. That's what God is saying. God will give you according to your own plan. God will judge you according to what you judge others. Measure for measure. So therefore, we should always try to do what to judge people into the side of merit. No matter how we have the good intention, no matter how Miriam have the greater intention to bring her brother home. Say, no, I don't know what is in her head. I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that no matter how you say it, you shouldn't have no way say, what does he think he is? That is, you are degrading the servant of God. Even though Moshe is the last born in the family, yes, God has chosen him to be the head. And so therefore, you have to respect that. So therefore, you have to pay obeisance unto that, because God has chosen him to be the head. It doesn't matter. Taking, for example, our Prime Minister Trudeau. Trudeau is not the oldest person in Canada. No. But God has placed him there as the premier or as the Prime Minister of the country. And so therefore, we have to accord him that respect. According to the position that he's holding. He's the Prime Minister, he's the leader, he's the one in charge, he's the captain of the ship. So therefore, we have to pay him the respect that is due unto him as the Prime Minister. So the same thing here, as God has made Moshe the head, you cannot say, oh, who does it think he is? No, he's doing according to what God has commanded him. So therefore, my people, the message here that God is trying to tell us through this parasha Behaloteha is for us to understand what we are doing, so that we will not fall into the same mistake that our forefather fell in, that pit, in that hole, that we should not fall inside it. The Torah is a light. Torah is a guide. It's a light on our path. It's guiding us. It's guiding our ways, so that we will not fall into a trap, so that we will not fall into the pit, so that we will do what is right and just. So that is what the Torah is talking about, and that's what this parasha is telling us. That no matter how the situation be, even though no matter how we envision our life, and if it doesn't work out the way it is, or the way we envision it, we shouldn't be bitter. We shouldn't say negativity. We shouldn't dwell in negativity. But that with hope and with the understanding of the Most High God, with the help of the Torah, we can make things right. We'll walk in that path of justice, in that path of righteousness, in the path of hope. May God bless you, may God sustain you, and may God continue to strengthen you. Because as far as we live in the path of the Torah, as far as we obey the word of God, God will continue to sustain and continue to bless and continue to guide us. May God bless you, may God sustain you, may you find peace and favor in the sight of the Most High God. Shabbat Shalom.